Welcome to the On Assignment podcast. My name is Will Derlick. This is my co-host, John Harvey. John, how are you?
Doing great. Happy to be here with you.
So today's a pretty cool topic. We're going to discuss leading as men in kind of this new age technology that we're in, and leading our family, leading our kids through that, and how we do that. And last night, I was thinking about, we kind of talked about social media and new age technology, and we're going to dive into social media quite a bit. But I was like, man, social media is so influential.
Yeah.
And I was just, last night, I was like, how has social media influenced me? And while I was thinking about that, I was cutting a roast up of meat.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy popped up on my page called Meat Dad. I don't know if you've ever heard of Meat Dad.
Yeah, I know him.
But he finds the best deals on meat, and he's like, okay, this is the cut of meat that you go purchase, and you cut it up, and it's like 25% off what it would be to if they were pre-cut steaks. And I was doing that, and I was like, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't for social media.
Yeah, exactly.
And I was like, man, it's even when we don't recognize it, we're being influenced by technology. We're being influenced by social media for good and for bad. And so as fathers, we need to recognize the power that holds, the power of influence that social media has, the power of technology that it has for good and for bad for our families. And so I think where we're going to start is the why. And the why is, what is the threat? Like, why do we need to engage and be, as fathers, step into that role to protect our kids? Like, why is social media a threat, basically?
Yeah, social media, technology, whether it's any of the major platforms or streaming platforms, all of those things, or even in the realm of video games. As fathers, we're called to protect our families and raise our children up. And so when we're talking about how we lead as dads with digital technology, it's really important that we understand that we're not just dealing with a neutral party here.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't like just a neutral tool that if you have it in your hands, you know that is something that can influence you for good or for bad, like you said earlier. And if that's the case with you as a grown man, what is that like in the hands of an 8-year-old
Mm-hmm.
or a 13-year-old? And there's so much out there that we're going to talk about the threat that we face and that our children face, our families face when it comes to digital technology. That we understanding that our role as fathers is to protect our homes, mm-hmm. and to be involved in such a way to where we're not just allowing things to access our children's hearts and minds that shouldn't have influence in their life. And so a big part of the why here is that there are forces out there that would utilize technology in such a way as to take advantage of our children. Mm-hmm. And this isn't like a conspiracy theory, or this isn't like a hyper paranoid father, who's, just really kind of hyper vigilant on this subject saying that. This is proven facts.
Yeah.
You see it in studies all over, that the impact of this on our children's development, like growing up with a screen in front of them, the impact of that in their development at a social level, their ability to engage socially, the way that they think about themselves when they see everyone else on social media portraying themselves a certain way, and how that impacts the development of our children and their identity. All of these different areas are being shaped in their life from the time they're children, that now digital technology has a hand in if we allow it to.
Yeah, and I also listened to a podcast yesterday. It was just a segment. It was a reel, and they talked about how when you have a screen in front of you, you're watching something.
Yeah.
The part of your brain that completely disengages during that is the prefrontal cortex. And they said just like every muscle, when our muscles get bigger and get better when they're being used, and they get weaker when they're not being used. They're saying when your kid has a screen in front of them, that part of their brain's completely disengaged.
Wow.
So it's getting weaker. It's not being
Mm.
exercised. It's kind of being put on the back burner. It's allowing other parts of the brain to overcompensate for that part of the brain. And that part of the brain is responsible for decision making. There was a handful of very important tasks that part of that brain is responsible for.
Mm.
And so it was kind of interesting. I
Yeah.
literally saw that yesterday and we're talking about it today, but I was like, that makes sense. Why all this data is kind of showing that these kids are struggling,
Yeah.
that are being exposed to this. And a lot of parents, I think it's a lack of education. It's very easy to hand your kid a device and to allow that to parent your child.
Yeah.
I'm right there with toddlers right now.
Yeah.
It's you have to be intentional, and it is very easy, and you see it all the time. Get my kid to stop talking. I'm going to put something in their face, and I'm not going to say that I've never done that, because it is a very easy thing to do, but it's definitely not the right thing to do.
Yeah. And for me, my kids are grown and out of the house, and I can say that we had to lead in this area, and we tried to lead as best as we could. And I didn't always lead perfectly in this area, but I did learn a lot, and we did well in certain areas that I
Yeah.
could say, yeah, this worked for us. There's other areas where I wish we had been more vigilant and done more, but you know, there's an element depending on how old that you are as a father. Like for me, I am what would be considered a digital transplant,
Mm-hmm.
whereas my children would be digital natives because they grew up with digital. At least my youngest for sure grew up with digital platforms around her whole life, where she had access. She could have had access to that her whole life.
Yep.
Whereas I'm a digital transplant that grew up without digital devices. And then in my mid to late 20s, cell phones, started becoming more and more available. In my 30s was when the Apple platforms, the iPods and iPhones and that kind of thing started coming out.
Yeah.
So I really wasn't, when I was a kid, it was literally a black and white screen TV with 3 channel options.
Yep.
And even with that, like it would have been easy for us as kids to come home from school and sit in front of the TV, because back then they had programming for kids on TV in the afternoon after school. And it would have been really easy for us to sit and watch TV until the evening news, which typically started at 5:30 or 6.
Yeah.
But so that was such a limited scope as compared to what parents have to deal with now.
How did your parents, so did they not allow that, or how did your parents lead you in that environment where there was TV shows like you're saying?
Yeah, like they had children's programming on TV.
Mm-hmm.
And like one channel, I don't remember what station it was or whatever, but it would have like a movie that it would play, and they'd play like a week of the monster movies. So they'd have like the Godzilla movie, King Kong movies, that kind of stuff. Otherwise, it'd be a week of westerns, and they'd show westerns. But it was like that timeline when you're getting off of school at 3:00.
Yeah.
That programming would start.
Yep.
And then that would go till about 5:30 or 6 when the evening news came on, which would always dominate all 3 channels,
Mm-hmm.
ABC, NBC, and CBS. Those 3 channels would have evening news, and then you'd go into your evening programming where you'd watch TV show. There'd be TV shows. But my parents, it depended on the season that they were in.
Okay.
When both my parents were working, we'd come home and we'd just kind of sit in front of the TV and watch TV until the parents got home.
Yep.
And that was usually right before dinner time.
That's how I grew up.
Yeah.
Parents are working, you come home. That's why raising kids a little differently, it's like, man, that's against what my culture was in my house.
Yeah.
And we're creating a new culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when my mom was home or my dad was home, it was always like, hey, you got home from school, and depending on the weather, well, we always had to have our homework done first if we had homework. And then they were pretty good about like, hey, you're not going to just sit and watch TV. You go out and play. You
Yeah.
got chores, you got stuff to do. So it was relatively structured when they were around, but when they were working and weren't home, we would until my like junior high years, and then I grew tired of that, and I was pretty active as a junior high kid and a high schooler. So, but that being said, I grew up without the digital. I'm a digital transplant.
Yep.
And so you might be a dad who's listening to this, and you might be a digital native, and you've just had access to digital devices your whole life. And we definitely, I can see the difference between what I had access to as a kid and what you had access to as a kid.
Yep.
I didn't really even start having any kind of issues. I mean, I saw porn. Speaking of porn and the access that kids have
That's a
to,
threat.
so definitely it's a threat.
Yep.
But like for me, access to porn when I was a kid looked like some cutouts from a magazine on my cousin's wall when we went and visited his house.
Yeah.
And it was the first time I'd seen but it was like his parents evidently couldn't have cared less. He's got these things on his wall. I go to their house. We're going to spend some time there, and I'm going to spend the night in my cousin's room. And so I go in there with my bag and going to settle in, and he's got the stuff on his walls, and it's like, holy cow.
Yeah, we talked about that boys being boys mentality in previous episodes.
Well, my mom, she came in at some point, was like, oh, what is going on here? And then she obviously got me out of there, which was the right thing to do. But by that time I'd already seen it. Yep. You cannot unsee that.
Yeah.
And, but still though, I didn't have access to any kind of pornography unless it just showed up in front of me, unless it was like some kind of exposure that was completely unplanned. And I look at the difference between that and then a kid who has a device with access to pornography right on the phone.
Yep.
And it's just so different. I mean, you can literally find it like that.
Yep.
If a kid has access to the internet on his phone. And so the difference in dynamic between leading in those two environments is completely different. And the exposure threat is tremendous. And as a father, you cannot be naive in thinking that your kids will be fine if they have access to technology and that you're too busy, you've got too much going, and that's always the last thing on your list to take care of, or that, oh, my wife or their mom will take care of it. No. You have to be very vigilant in this area and be a part of raising your kids in a way to where they understand how to think about and how to use the digital technology appropriately.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I'm so passionate about this, is because I was born in 97. I believe the iPod Touch came out in 2008, something like that.
Yeah.
Of course, I get the iPod Touch. I don't know if it was a gift or how I got hands on it, but literally that year at 10 years old, found pornography for the first time, wasn't taught. It's just like, it's crazy how you don't just stumble upon it, but it kind of just happens. It's untaught. I was a good kid, someone that my parents probably thought was completely innocent, but stumbled upon the wrong thing at the wrong time. And you have direct access to it. And you're a kid, you're young, you don't know any better. And you like this feeling that you get, and you just get hooked at 10 years old. And we've talked about how the enemy doesn't play fair.
Yep.
He is coming after your kids, whether they're the best little angels you've ever met. He's pursuing them. He's trying to come after them. And he is sneaky in the way that he does it. He's the deceiver.
Yeah.
And he can get in through a little 8-inch screen.
Yeah.
And wreck their lives.
Totally.
Try to.
Yeah.
And I'm passionate about this because, that was me, and I've gotten to see the destruction that exposure caused me at such a young age, and how it's carried into later and later and builds more and more and turns into
Yeah.
more and more things, and you start opening more and more doors, and it's a very sneaky cycle that us as parents and as fathers need to be aware of
Yeah.
and need to be vigilant and proactive and have those conversations before you give your kid technology. These should be the forefront of your conversations. This
Yeah.
should be the forefront of really your priority list. Is I need to educate my kid on this and what it's capable of doing. And we also need to put some safeguards in there, right?
Yeah.
Like if we're handing our kid a good example of this, and you and I talked about this, is our kids are going to be more educated and more able to use that device than us.
Yeah.
It's just the way that it is. It's
Yeah.
the way that generations work. I hand my kid, so we FaceTime our in-laws and stuff when we're at home. And so I hand I think she was 2 years old at the time, to FaceTime my mom.
Mm.
And she's able to do things on that device that I never knew was capable.
Yeah. And that
At two
that's
years
nuts.
old,
That's actually nuts.
she can click on it, manipulate it, turn her face into an animal face. I was like, whoa, how did you do that?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was raised in this world of technology. I thought I was
Yeah.
pretty tech savvy, but at 2 years old, she's
Yeah.
able to do that. So
Wow.
your kids are
Yeah.
able to figure things out very fast, better
Yeah.
than you. So as parents, if you're giving your kids technology, you need to be educated.
Right.
You need to do your homework.
Be aware.
And understand how to control it, how to put some safeguards in place, how to set some guardrails for them. Because you as the parent need to do that. That's your responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
Your 8-year-old's not going to put guardrails on
Right.
themselves.
Yeah.
They don't even know what that is. They don't know what they need to protect themselves
No.
of. And then they get exposed to it and it feels good. They get hooked.
Right.
And they don't understand the damage that it's causing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what are some things practically that we can do with that?
Right.
With our devices.
The reason why we would put these safeguards into place is so that we can be cautious against the fact that the technology can impact the development of our kids mental and socially. There are exposure threats with the technology to where there could be even accidental exposure to things that we don't need our kids to see, that are harmful to them, that we don't want our kids to see. There's also the use of the technology can also develop habit patterns and even get to the point of addiction, to where they have to have a device in order to feel comfortable, or they have to have a device with them in order to operate well. And so there's all of these things that are at work in the technology that would, first of all, cause me to question, do I even want my kids to have this technology? Because the benefit of the technology is that they can learn some good things there. They can have fun kids entertainment on that technology, but the risk isn't worth the reward. And so as a father and as a man, you have to really begin to weigh, do I even want that exposure? Do I want to even have that exposure to my kids? Is that something, is a decision that I even want to make? And when you are dealing with that, there's some really important keys to understand, that before you worry about putting the safeguards in place, you got to decide, are we going to do this or not?
Yeah.
Are we actually going to put a device in the hands of our kids?
Mm-hmm.
And if we do, at what point do we want that to take place? And so I feel like that as we look at that element of the question of, are we going to do it? And then if we are, when? I feel like that's an important conversation to have with your spouse.
Yeah.
And to make sure that the two of you are on the same page. If you're married and operating under the same roof together in your home, it's important to be on the same page and have a unified approach in that way.
100%. And what type of technology are we going to allow?
Yeah.
Too.
Yeah.
That's a big question.
So creating a plan for this is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And And so like we were able, like, our some of the first exposure like our kids got was to like the video games, because video games were out before those video game platforms were out before like technology for handheld devices was out. And so like our kids got they got what was it, I think it was a Nintendo 64 or one of
Oh
those
yeah.
gaming systems
Hmm.
for Christmas from a very generous uncle, and we were super grateful. But it was like my oldest daughter, she might play a game for a little bit, but she had no problems getting sucked into the gaming world. But then you gave my son a controller, and he became a gaming zombie
Why
really
is
quickly.
that? It's the boys,
Yeah,
man.
I don't know. I don't know if we can categorize it like that or not, but in our house, that's the way it was.
Yeah.
And so, our son was like, he got like an Incredibles game. I remember there being an Incredibles game. There was a Spider-Man game, and then a Legos game. Just and then it developed from there into like Call of Duty. These first person. Uh, I don't even know how to
Do
call it.
you think that equipped him for what he's doing now?
He's probably a better shot because of that. I don't know. I don't know. But he could have easily spent hours and hours and hours playing that game. And my wife and I realized this early on, that that's not our value system, and that's not the way we want him to be raised. And so we're going to have to make a plan and
Yeah.
come together with a good plan, and then implement that plan together in order for us to be able to keep this at bay,
Yeah.
because it could have consumed him.
Yeah.
And so we did that. We actually created a plan to where it was like, you know what, son, you're not really going to be on your gaming system on this, gaming system during the week, but on Saturdays after your chores are done, you can play for an hour.
Hmm.
And then, so he got that window of opportunity to play. And then what we would do is we created a reward system to where it's like, hey, great job, son. You know what? The weather's lousy today, so you did really good on your chores. So why don't you take an extra hour on your game?
Yeah.
And he was like,
Nice.
that was like to him super exciting, but it wasn't the expectation, because the expectation is that, yeah, you'll get an hour if things go well during the week and you get your chores done.
Yeah. And I think unity with your spouse starts at envisioning the culture that you want in your home
Yeah.
and talking about that early on. I mean, when
Yes.
your kids are young, and like setting the culture.
That's really
So
good.
like
Yep.
you can know when you're in a atmosphere or a place and you don't fit into the culture, you can just feel it. And I think that's good for our kids to like, that's a good, what is it, litmus test or
Litmus.
litmus
Litmus
test?
test. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good test for them, is like, if you set the culture in their home, they will know what fits in and what doesn't.
Right.
So how did you and Brenda do that? Like raising your kids, what culture did you set?
That's a great question, and we could actually probably do a whole podcast episode
Yeah.
on that in and of itself. But one of the things that we did do is we actually had a statement that we actually had typed out, and we had it printed, and we just had it up on that this is what being a Harvey looks like.
That's awesome.
And so that was something that we incorporated when our kids were a little bit older. Like I think my oldest daughter was she must have been like in third or fourth grade by that point, and then Austin was he was 3 years younger, and then Natalie, our youngest, was just a baby at that point. She's younger by then she's I think 8 years younger than our oldest daughter.
Okay.
So, but we put that we just made a statement, and it was
Mhm.
something simple, and we printed it up, and that was on the kitchen wall, and that's kind of what we talked about.
That's awesome.
And when it came to the values, though, one of the values is that you kids are athletic and you're active, and we don't want you sitting around the house just playing, doing nothing. And so
Mhm.
we want you to be active. And so that became part of the culture of the house.
Did
And
you have to keep going back like to the list and
yes,
like walk them through it
yes,
and like go look
yeah,
at the list, or
yeah,
how did you guys handle that?
yeah.
Okay.
You, it's not complicated,
Yeah.
but you feel like you know, you feel like you're preaching the same sermon over and over and over, but that's the reality of life.
Yeah.
The Bible was written, has been written was written over the course of so many years and was canonized and then came out in the printed edition. And we're still having to
Mhm.
learn,
Go back to it.
go back to it and
Yeah.
go back to it time and time again, because that's what it just takes, that consistent exposure to it but then you have to, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but you have to model it.
Mhm.
You have to then bring your children back to that point. But if you have the idea here is if you have a clear plan in place with your spouse, first of all, you can bring your kids back to that plan every time. Hey, what did we say?
Yep.
No, don't ask me on Wednesday if you can play your game, because you know that what the answer to that's going to be.
Mhm.
And so you bring in clear boundaries. You've got clear guardrails in place, and a kid can complain against that, and that's part of being a kid is kind of trying to work your way through your feelings on that. But it's like it gives you no. What do we say? So Saturday? Oh yeah,
Mhm.
Saturday you're going to get to play.
Yep.
And the other thing is, so it gives clear guardrails and boundaries for your kids, but it also prevents their ability to manipulate either you or your spouse based upon which one of you might be the softy.
That's one thing that I wanted to touch on. Was that's one thing that I notice is when Sydney and I have like firm guardrails set
hmm
and we're consistent.
Yeah.
That's so it seems strict, but our kids enjoy it more because they know the answer. They
Yeah.
know what we're going to say.
Right.
There's no guessing or so really hammering down like this is how we're going to approach. Like right now we're talking about technology. This is how we're going to approach it,
Yeah.
and we're going to stay consistent here. We're
Yeah.
not going to give in certain times. We're not going to that's what I'm noticing the challenge between parenting is staying consistent
Yeah.
even when it's not easy, even when it's not convenient. It's staying consistent.
hmm Yeah. Because there was times when it would have been easier to let them be on their games on the gaming system during the week. This
Yeah.
is when we're talking gaming systems. And as they developed and got older, and we moved into more like smartphones and iPods when they first came out, and then the iPhones when they came out, we still had to kind of have these same guardrails in place. But it would have been really easy when they were little to have them go play a game rather than trying to, because if I came home from work and I'm tired and Brenda's had a busy day, I if they're not playing their games, they're wanting to play.
Yeah.
And so that means that I'm getting out of my truck. And a lot of times they were already climbed into my truck by the time I even got out of my truck, because they were excited to see dad get home. And they loved I had a 71 Ford that was really cool.
Oh
And
gosh.
they would climb I'd back into the, carport by the side of our house. And by the time I typically was there, the kids were climbing into the back of the
Was that
truck.
your daily?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh, John.
Yeah. It was great. Yeah. But,
I love it.
that meant that I had to engage with my kids, because they didn't have, that was part of the culture. So I'd be tired from getting home from work. I'd
Mhm.
go say hi to my wife. And then it was like, it was go time with the kids.
Yeah.
Some days it would have been easier when there was stress and paperwork and different things to do. It would have been really a lot easier to say, hey, why don't you kids go play a game?
Mhm.
And I need to get right into the office. So it kind of held me accountable too, and my wife.
Yeah.
Or, because the kids learn early on how to kind of push buttons and manipulate, which is part of it.
Yep.
And so as parents, if you have those guardrails in place, then it's like, what the standard is and you keep those standards, and it helps you keep the standard. It helps your kids keep the standard.
Mhm.
But in the long run, you're always glad you had that.
And I think when you don't keep the standard, the impact of that is so many steps backwards.
Yeah.
Because then your kid's confused
Yes.
with lack of consistency.
hmm
That's what I notice is just, man, when we're consistent, our kids know exactly what the expectation is, and there's no confusion.
hmm
Removes stress, removes anxiety, removes all the things that some kids may feel if they don't have these clear guidelines, these clear um, rules and consistency between
Yeah.
your spouse, it's
Hmm.
super, super
Yeah.
beneficial.
Growth happens best in that type of an environment
Yeah.
where there's continuity, there's consistency, and and you're making adjustments as your kids get older. And the other thing is that there's also an element where if we're talking to dads from maybe you've gone through a divorce and you're sharing custody now with your kids, or is in that situation specifically, it can be difficult.
That's hard to have consistency there.
The But making sure that that when your kids come to when you have custody of your kids and it's your time with those kids,
Mhm.
I've seen fathers do really well on this, where their kids know what to expect when they get time with dad.
Yeah.
And the dads that put the effort into making that a time where they have their focus is on the kids, and it's like, hey, this is what we're going to do, and they've got things planned out, and they're able to really kind of develop a consistent approach to their time with their kids. The kids do much better than when it's kind of like dad may or may not be available. There may or may not be guardrails in place, as far as like what the rules are at dad's place. And navigating that, I know, is much easier to talk about than to actually implement. But really working towards that as a father, who, when you're in a custody situation with your kids where you're sharing custody, creating a consistent culture at your house.
Mhm.
And then again, we could talk about this whole thing in another episode, but not talking badly about mom's environment, or not
Mhm.
talking bad about your mom, but being very clear on why you do what you do.
Yeah.
And it's what you're talking about. It's like, hey, this is the value that dad has in his life, and this is the culture that we have at dad's house. And so when you come here, this is what you can expect.
Yeah.
But it's also one where the dad has to really reinforce that with making sure that he's on board with it, that he's consistent, that
Yeah.
he's not a roller coaster of emotions, that they can come and have fun with dad, and that it can be a place where they're growing, being challenged, having fun, but really defining that culture, because it looks different for different dads.
Yeah.
So some dads might be more active, some dads might be um, more less active, but interested in different things and pointing their kids in different directions. But as long as there's a culture that's consistent and that it's actually thoughtful, then your kids are going to do well.
Yeah. And I think it's a lot of dads might be worried about setting that tone, or really, if it's different at mom's house and I have these certain standards, well, what if my kid's not going to want to come over, or not going to want to see me, or it's going to be mad at me, or thinks that dad's just full of rules
Mm-hmm.
and this isn't fair and I want to stay at mom's house? I think that fear can creep in. But what fathers need to be intentional of is just communication with your kids.
Yeah.
Have that relationship and have that bond and take that time, like whatever your time is. My time is like before bedtime. Like that's where one-on-one connection happens with my kids. Like if there's anything that we need to talk about that happened that day, what was your highlight? What can we learn? And really take that time with your kids to have that communication. And like
Mm-hmm.
you said, clearly lay out why you have this culture, why you have these standards in your house. And I mean, these are kids, but also look at it from when you go to work. Like the leadership that you have, the best leadership that you have, clearly lays out why they lead this way, why
Mm-hmm.
your company has this culture.
Mm-hmm.
So look at it from that perspective too. Like you don't like walking into a boss's office that just has a bunch of rules that you don't know why they're there. You automatically go to that child of, oh, this is unfair. My boss just has a bunch of rules, and this is just not good.
Right.
But when they lay out why these rules are in place, why our culture at work is this way, why we prioritize safety, why we
Mm-hmm.
prioritize certain elements that are super important to do good quality work, well, incorporate that in your home,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. It takes a lot of intentionality to build culture
Yeah.
and to establish the culture in your home. And so,
And it's easy to just say, these are the rules. I'm going to go watch the football game.
Yes.
you know?
And that's where, when we talk about leading in this area of technology, your heart as a father should be to be involved in the area of technology with your kids, and not just kind of let them navigate that path on their own, nor just put all that on their mom, or your wife, or their mom, and just be like, she can handle that. That's not really my role.
Yeah.
Your role as a father in their life is very much a part of this. In fact, we're called to, Proverbs 22 verse 6 says, if we train up a child in the way they should go, then when they are older, they will not depart from it. And your children are going to have their they're going to have access to technology the rest of their lives. And your sons and your daughters are going to be one day released into their destiny as they get older, and they're going to have to know how to utilize technology in a good way.
Yeah.
And this is the time when you're teaching them that. This is the time when you're training them up in that. And part of that leadership involves you having an awareness of what's going on, of the challenges and the threats that are out there. It involves you being willing to step into understanding the context of where your kids are at, like stepping into their shoes and looking at it through their context. I think that's really important, that you're not just making grown-up decisions and this kind of applying grown-up decisions to children and then expecting them to understand it without what you're talking about, this communication piece.
Mm-hmm.
And then third, they have to be able to see dad
Yeah.
using technology in a wise way.
Yeah.
So if you're at the restaurant and you're taking your family out to dinner and you're sitting there on your phone while the rest of the family is, talking or doing whatever, that's a terrible example.
Yep.
If you're on your phone all evening and on social media, just kind of scrolling through social media, or on a streaming service and you're just watching YouTube on the TV, or, whatever it is, you set the tone and you model it. And so what you want to, the values that you have and the culture you want to build in your house, it starts with you modeling that.
Yeah. Yeah. And to go with that, we have the ability to do some work from our phones, we do. And like, I run my business out of my house.
Yeah.
I have a home office. So when I'm doing work on my phone, because if you just are in the corner on your phone, it doesn't matter what you're doing. It looks like the worst case scenario. You're just surfing social media, not paying attention to the kids. So in those moments where I need to respond to an email, or I need to send an invoice, or review an estimate, or do whatever work adjustment, I try to be intentional with my kids and get them around me and explain to them, like, this is what I'm doing. This is the project that I'm working on. This is what the customer needs from me right now. This is what I'm saying to them. And it might bore them to death, but my experience with it is they're super interested and they think it's super cool.
Right. Yeah.
They're like, oh, okay, wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're working, you're helping people out, you're building whatever project at someone's home, you're helping people, and you just implement that into, like, I just don't want dads to feel guilty for when they have to do work from their phone if they're working from home.
Yeah.
Or if they need to take their laptop out to respond to an email. But include your kids in that. That's kind of what I've noticed.
That's good.
And it's, instead of being completely disconnected, it's bringing them in, and you're still having that connection while doing what you need to do to provide.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we have to do some certain things in non-convenient times to provide for the family.
Yeah.
So, and then you do that, your spouse is right there with you. She's not thinking that you're just in the corner surfing social media. Now she's aware of what you're doing. You're teaching your kids. You're teaching your kids work ethic and how to work. Like, so it's not all like black and white, like no phones in the house or never on the phone.
Yeah.
But be intentional about what you're doing.
Yeah. That's really good, because you want to model it and you want your kids to understand what's going on. And if you've said, hey kids, you can't have screen time, and you're on,
but then you're doing,
then it's good to be like, hey, dad's working now, and I'm trying to get done really quick here, but I have to do this right now. But yeah, I feel like that's a really good approach to that. We we want to be men who lead well and who lead intentionally, who are modeling our use of technology well. And so that's a big part of it because our kids are watching. They do see that.
Yeah.
The other thing is that so let's do this. First of all, the decision to or not to have your children be able to have access to technological devices like phones or tablets, whatever. I feel like that it's important for dads out there to know that there's no pressure on you to have those things in your kids' hands.
Mm-hmm.
That from a pure leadership standpoint, you're going to feel a lot of pressure, but there's no pressure. Your children will develop just fine without those things. They will be able to integrate into the use of those things, even if they start using those things way later than anyone else.
Yep.
And so I want to release fathers from the pressure put on them by their children and by society to say, oh, we have to have a phone when I'm 13 or when I'm 10 or whatever, because you will get a lot of pressure, but you need to lead through your culture and through your values and the culture you want to build in your home. And I have seen, I just got back from a trip to to visit some of our family down in Southern California, and they have 5 children. I think between the ages of their oldest is 15 and I think their youngest is 8. And those kids don't have phones. They don't have devices, and they are perfectly adjusted. It was so good to see how well adjusted those kids are.
That's awesome.
Went and visited another family and was working down in Texas for a couple of weeks last winter. Family with 4 young boys.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like active boys, great kids,
Jacked,
just athletic and energetic and
Yeah.
amazing, and amazing parents too. No devices.
Yeah.
And very clear guidelines. So I'm not going to go into the guidelines that both of these families have set up because there are guidelines, and the kids do have access to some levels of, like being able to watch a certain channel on YouTube and being able to engage with friends through video streaming, to do, certain things. So there were certain levels of activity. I'm not saying there was no activity, but it was very much a very clear plan. But there was no devices in these kids' hands, like no phones. They weren't walking around with a phone or a tablet. And these kids were so well adjusted and so active and so happy. And so as a father, you might think that you might have that FOMO, that fear of your kids missing out. Yeah. And it's like, no, they're going to be just fine, even if you decide to not have anything. And I would say that that's actually a very safe and appropriate choice, mm-hmm. given the time that we live in and the challenges and the threats that are out there.
Yeah.
And so, but that has to be a decision that you make and your wife make together in order to have continuity and be able to implement your plan well.
Yeah.
So when you do decide, though, to implement technology into your kids' lives, I would recommend it being later than earlier. And I would say that you want to have this plan in place before you actually bring those devices and put them in your kids' hands.
Mm-hmm.
And you've already established a pretty solid culture because of the fact that you have not had devices in your home, and you've been encouraging your kids to develop normally and naturally in their social interactions and their mental health. And so you're going to provide them a much better foundation on which to build a technological structure in their life.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's really important, that your kids understand that the better way is the active way. The better way is to actually get your hands on a book and read a physical book. Mm-hmm. The better way is to actually listen to music through a speaker within your home. We implemented music a lot during dinner time. We wanted music to be a part of our home. We had, whether it was, if we were having Italian spaghetti, if we were doing spaghetti for dinner and having a little bit of an Italian meal, It's like, yeah, throw on some Pavarotti and let's go.
Mhm.
Let's get some
That's
opera
awesome.
going here. If we're doing, something, we loved Mexican food, man. We'd have like, we had our favorite groups and our favorite bands, and we'd have the music going, and it builds
Yeah.
culture in your home, and it was fun.
Yeah.
So developing that type of thing where it's like, yeah, we have music in our house, and we got books for our kids to read. We've got activities for our kids to do outside.
Yeah, and it is a form of like stimulus for your kids.
Yeah.
Like their kids, they kind of seek and gravitate towards that. It's either a screen or it's sound, but yeah, if you implement that music and make it fun and
Mm-hmm.
dance,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
we
Yeah.
love doing that.
It's so
It's a
fun.
blast.
It does it builds memories. It builds family dynamic. It's such a healthy thing to do. Build to where the culture is established without the technology, and then incorporate the technology into it.
Mhm.
And because the technology has obviously some useful elements to it.
Yeah.
But when it becomes integrated into the main part of culture, and your culture centers around the technology, it has way too much pull and way too much power in the development of your culture.
Yeah.
So some things that you can do to help that happen are to really develop your culture first with your children when your children are young, to where you build the culture in your house of here's the activities we do together, here's the creative elements that we participate in together, the dancing, the music, the different things. I was never much of a dancer, but my wife certainly was, and
Mhm.
we always had music, and we always had, like, if I ever did a project with the kids, it was always like, hey, we're doing chores right now, we're cleaning the house. I would always have music.
Yeah.
If we're working together on getting ready for dinner, music, just to have that creative element in the house. And there's other elements of art and creativity that you can incorporate as well, but you're building that into your culture, and then technology can be introduced to kind of uh, help supplement that, you
Yeah.
might say. So uh, having being intentional in that, taking the time is so important. Sometimes we get so caught up with everything we've got going in life as fathers that our family times are kind of hit and miss, or they're very unintentional. It's just kind of like flying by the seat of our pants, and we need to be intentional. And
Yeah.
what I found through the years, and I didn't come up with this saying, but I heard it somewhere, is that presence is better than content.
Mhm.
And so it wasn't so much about what I was saying, or what I was preaching or lecturing on when I was with
That's
it.
so good.
It was like, it wasn't so much about that. It was more about just being present,
Yeah.
and
And it
just,
removes the stress.
yeah.
Cuz sometimes I'm like, man, I don't even know what to say here.
Hmm.
Like I got to parent this. Did I parent it right? And then, yeah, presence.
Presence.
Yeah.
Presence is better than content. They will remember you more about how you made them feel than what you told them.
Yeah.
And there was areas where I did really well in that. And there was areas where I didn't. Sometimes I hear my adult children talk, and I'm like, oh wow, I needed to smile a little bit more, evidently. But so understanding that, man, just being present in this whole thing is a big piece of this whole overall technology conversation,
Yeah.
because a lot of times the technology is put into the kids' hands because there's not a parent present.
Mhm.
So when you are present, you lead well, you have a clear plan with your wife, you model the use of the technology well. Once you actually have integrated that into part of your family culture, you lead well with it. And then make sure that what that does, though, is it actually you're not having to provide alternatives for the technology, but you've already got those foundations in place where it's like, when for me it was like when dad got home, that was time. I always went in and I kissed my wife first and said hi to her first, so the kids knew my priority.
Mhm.
But then, and I say always, I mean, that was like literally something that I really focused on and was intentional about. So it might not have been always, but it was like a lot. That was very consistent. Then it was like, then it's kid time. So I got home from work and I'm rolling on the ground with the kids, wrestling, playing. I'm in the backyard throwing the football, pushing them on the swing. It's like, it doesn't matter how dad feels. It doesn't matter what dad's got on his mind. It's like I switched gears, put on a different hat, and I'm in dad mode,
Mm-hmm.
because that's when they're full of energy. They're, it's, that evening, that early evening mark. And it was always dad time, then dinner time, and then time for getting them kind of wound down and ready for the evening. And then as they get older and they go through different seasons, then you're adjusting that, of course.
Yeah.
But that was huge in establishing this culture in our home,
Yeah.
because the kids weren't dependent on a screen. They had stuff to do when they got done with school and they were home from school, and then dad got home and it was like, okay, it's active time, and then it was dinner time. Just those putting those elements into place consistently, as consistently as you can, is huge. And
Yeah.
there's going to be days when you have to work late and you miss dinner.
That's
It,
what I was gonna say. Is like I could see guys saying, "Well, it must be nice."
yeah.
Like those guys that are putting in the 14-hour days, 6 days a week,
Mm-hmm.
leave for work at 5 a.m. and get home at 7 or 8,
Yep.
and the kids are getting ready to go to bed.
Yep.
How can you work consistency into that?
Yeah. That's a big part of our conversation we had when we were talking about mastering the daily grind. You have to create priorities.
Yep.
And if your priority is work, your family will always get what's left over.
Mm-hmm.
And I, early on, like construction, the summertime, we were running. We were like lathered up all summer from just running hard. And there was some long days, so it wasn't like I was at home for dinner every night, but it was like when I was home, I was home. I was present.
Yeah.
I put in long days. We worked really hard. And there were some days when it was hard to come home and actually have that energy to go play with the kids, especially as they got older. It was more challenging. But I realized that window of time you have with your kids to where you can do that is very short and limited.
Yeah.
And if I gave myself to work, I would miss out.
Mm-hmm.
And so to answer your question, you have to prioritize your family.
Yeah.
You have to prioritize that time. And so I made choices to be at home. I was very intentional about being at home and having a job that allowed me to actually be home,
Mm-hmm.
and to not work every Saturday in the summertime.
Yeah.
There was weeks where it was like, okay, I'll put in as many hours as I need to during the week in order to be home on the weekend. So there was seasons where I would do that. Then there was times where it was like, hey, I've worked like 2 or 3 really long days, and I'm leaving early today. I'm going to head out at 3 and be at home in time to have the whole evening with my family.
Yeah.
You've got to cheat somewhere, and so I would typically try to cheat my work and be at home.
Yeah, and what you're saying, presence is so important from a father. And
Mm-hmm.
when you have kids, that's you brought your kids into this world,
Mm-hmm.
and now you have responsibility.
Yep.
And so you definitely have to prioritize things and understand what's important. Do you really, there's going to be opportunity where you can take some time, family time.
Yeah.
Do you really need that extra shift, that extra overtime money? Maybe you do. Maybe you are really struggling financially. And I hope that you're able to get out of that. But if you don't, there's so much more value in your presence in your home than whatever that paycheck will bring.
I was fortunate because I was intentional actually in my choice of career, because I had opportunities to do other kinds of work that would require me to travel or require me to be gone more. And I chose a different route. But my job allowed me to at least be home in time to tuck the kids in bed at night. And so I made that a priority. And so if I missed dinner, I was always there for tucking them in at bed. Now this is not to say that guys have to be at home every night, because there's going to be times when you have to work, like you said, like with your 24-hour shift, you're gone.
Yep.
And that's okay. I look at my son, and I think of my son. My son has 6-month-long deployments.
Exactly.
He's gone from home for 6 months.
Yep.
And he's got to make choices based upon his priorities and his culture, the culture in their home. But that's where the beauty of technology comes into place. And it's like, he can actually FaceTime his wife and his son
Yep.
most of the time. A lot of the time, there's times when he can't, but when he can, he says he talks to him once or twice a day.
Yep.
And so you're just trying to connect. And so this isn't something to where I'm trying to put a standard on guys of you have to be home at night, but you have to be driven to prioritize your family.
Mm-hmm.
You have to fight for that time. And so I do know that one thing about my son is when he's home, he's home.
Yeah.
When he's not deployed, like he might call me, like literally he'll call me when he's not deployed and he's working at front, and just doing his normal training. He'll call me when he leaves the base and we'll talk on the phone. And I always know when he pulls up into the driveway because he starts literally stopping the conversation and kind of wrapping it up. And he's like, "Oh, I'm home. Got to go spend time with my wife and son." I'm like, "You bet. Get
That's
going."
awesome.
And so, but he won't talk on the phone when he's at home.
Yeah.
Because that's his time. And he knows he's going to be gone for a deployment. And so when he's home, he's home. And I really love that about his decision making. And so you have to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no condemnation on guys that travel for work or have long shifts.
Yeah, we all have different occupations.
You're gonna whatever it is that God's put in your hand to do it with all your heart.
Yep.
You got to prioritize your family though.
Mm-hmm.
And so what does that look like? And that's the real key here is that you prioritizing your family also means that you're going to be involved in the process of shaping their technological use and the use of the devices that they've got. And so being able to decide when your kids have it, and then once you do integrate that into your family culture or your family life, how do you begin to lead through that? And that's where it's like, how much time do you want your kids on their device? When do you want the kids to be on their device? Those are all important factors.
Yeah.
So some practical things there that we did and as a family that I thought were really helpful, where we created certain guidelines that lasted even as our kids were into their teens. And so our kids, I feel like our kids got phones and when they were in high school. We really didn't. I don't think our kids had phones in junior high. It's been a while, so I'd have to clarify that with my wife. But I feel like it was like when they got into high school, they got a phone. And then that phone usage was what we did really well is like we had a charging station where the phones had to be there and charging at 9:00 at night. And so every night it was just like, that's where my phone would go. And so it was like when I'd just check, make sure that their phones were there. Great. And it was never like me having to round them up. That was just like, they have to be there by 9. Yep.
Yeah.
And so that was something that we did really good was the gaming systems, we had very clear guidelines on when games, when you could be on a gaming system. We didn't have TVs and devices like that in the kids' bedrooms. And so they weren't able just to kind of be on their games, 24/7. That was set up in the living room. Mm-hmm. So if it was time when they could play the games, it was like, cool. They were playing it with mom and dad around, and it was very much a part of, of what was going on, but it wasn't done in their rooms. And so we did that. I feel like we did those couple of things really good. What we did not do well was, and what I would change now, what I know is I wouldn't have had them have their phones at all in their bedrooms or in their bathrooms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's super smart.
Just now what I know, and even, talking with my kids, it's like, yeah, that was not the best for us to be able to have our phones in a secret or private place like that.
Yeah.
Because it's asking for trouble.
Yep.
And so I would recommend to parents that, man, if you're going to have the kids have a device, make sure that there's a time at which those devices have to be turned off or be charging in a public place, and then have your kids only use those devices in a public place.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Because otherwise it's setting your kids up for failure, and it allows them to potentially get access to things that are going to be hurtful to them because you're not around.
Yeah.
Secondly, I feel like what we did really well was we had a culture of transparency. And I was telling you earlier where like my kids still know the passcode to my phone, and they can get onto my phone anytime. If they as long as as they're asking, it's like, hey, Dad, can I use your phone? Yeah, sure, use it. But they knew the passcode, and basically the thought there is that there was never anything on my phone that I was afraid that my wife would see or my kids would see.
Yep.
There was not going to be a time when they got onto my phone and they opened up the browser and there's porn on the browser.
Yep.
Or whatever. So it's like,
and that's part of you being an example of how to lead with
Yep.
technology well.
Yep.
And how to have integrity.
Yes. And what that allowed for us to say, hey, at any point in time, we may just be like, hey, can we check your phone out?
Yeah.
And it's not because we're trying to be, heavy handed but we're just trying to make sure that things aren't on there that are hurtful. It's part of transparency. And so if I'm going to ask my kids and say, hey, I'd like to have access to your phone at really any time, then I'm like, hey, you can have access to my phone at any time.
Yeah.
And they may not necessarily think that's necessarily a just balance, but that's the way it's got to be. Is I've got to be able to, if you're going to have a device, mom and dad need to be able to make sure that there's nothing on there that's inappropriate.
Yeah. And I think I can see it getting ugly. So if you do find something, I could see that getting real ugly and some parents not knowing how to handle that appropriately. I don't know if you guys ever found anything, but if you did, how would you and Brenda have handled that?
It shouldn't be ugly.
Yeah.
It should not be ugly. Because from the time your children are small, you're dealing with sin in their life.
Yep.
You're dealing with bad decisions. You're dealing with their selfish desires. You're dealing with all of those things from the time they start smacking each other to where they don't want to share, where they steal from each other. You're dealing with that human nature in your children from the get-go. And so my point there about it not being ugly by the time they get a phone is because you've already hopefully established a culture and a pattern of how you handle sin and how you handle shortcomings and failures. And so this is one of those things where it's like, it's just, you're going to have to deal with it.
Yep.
Because it's human nature.
Yep.
And so the process of being able to be gentle with your children, not responding in anger, not responding in frustration, but being able to discipline your children in love, that whole process of watching your children learn to repent, forgiving, and then seeing them restored and being able to go through that whole process of discipline. It's the same when they're 3 to 4 years old as it is when they're 13 or 14 years old.
Yeah.
And if you build foundations in their life of that when they're really little, those foundations are much easier to build on than trying to do that, not doing that until they're a teenager and then trying to do it then.
Yeah. And you're going to have to put your pride aside. It's not a you problem. It's a fallen world problem. I think a lot of men can be prideful and say, I raised you up to be better. I thought I did everything, and you get hurt and your pride gets hurt. And we live in a fallen world, and our kids we're going to have to walk our kids through that.
That's right.
Walk our kids through sin. So I could see where it gets ugly is when pride gets in the way, and that's where anger creeps in, and your self-esteem and your, just as a man, I could see things falling apart there from a pride perspective pretty quickly. So just remember that. Yeah. Take a deep breath.
That's right.
It's not your fault.
Yeah.
This has nothing to do with you. That's but right. As a man, as a father, now it's your responsibility to parent this.
Right.
From love and heart.
That's right.
And I think you definitely need to check yourself before you walk into that room.
Yeah. That's the beautiful thing about being a son to the Heavenly Father.
Yeah.
Is there was often many times, literally many times when I was like, Father, how have you treated me when I've done the same thing that my son or my daughter just did?
Yeah.
And that that example that he set leading me was something that I could draw upon when it came to leading my children.
Mm-hmm.
And so the pride goes away real quick when you realize that, whoa, this rebellion that I've seen in my kids, or this hard-heartedness, or this just bad attitude, that's just a reflection of what I was going through last week at work, and the Lord had to deal with me. And so now I'm just dealing with, it's
Yep.
we need to maintain a humble posture, like you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that we're no different,
Yeah,
that
that's
we're broken fathers
yep,
leading broken children by grace, because of a father who loves us and who's made a way for us to actually break off the curse
yep,
and allow there to be this life-giving leadership that he pours into us so we can pour into our kids.
exactly. That's so good.
And I feel like that's a great point to, to where it's like, hopefully some of those things that you would run into would be mitigated and limited by the safeguards that you put into place.
Yeah.
Because there are safeguards that you can begin to implement when you do choose, if you choose, and when you choose to actually allow there to be devices integrated into your family. Really understanding that your effort in safeguarding that's very important.
Mm-hmm.
You teach your kids, and then you safeguard that. It's like you wouldn't put a skill saw or a nail gun in your kid's hand and say, hey, yeah, go have fun. You'd be like, no, if you're old enough to use this, I'm going to teach you how to use it safely,
Yep.
and I'm going to put safeguards into place so that you don't injure yourself.
Exactly.
We do that with any other thing, like a firearm or a tool, but so often we put a device in the kids' hands, and
With
it's,
no education, nothing.
and no
Yep.
safeguards.
Yeah.
And it's just like, well, I hope you do okay with it. And so understanding that there's a lot of safeguards out there that you can begin to implement. The safeguards they'll never take the place of you and your role as a father,
Yeah.
but they will help protect your kids.
Mm-hmm.
Just like you would put a fence around a flock of sheep to protect them from the wolves,
Yeah.
you still have to shepherd them. The wolves will still come, but you've done what you can to protect them, and you're doing your job as a shepherd. It's
Yeah.
the same with our kids and technology. We we when that choice is made to actually introduce that element of technology into our home, we have to put the safeguards in it and continue to shepherd, just like
Mm-hmm.
the fence around the sheep and our shepherding, because the wolves are out there. And we talked about the
Yep.
wolves a little bit earlier. And and so some of those safeguards are elements to where some of them are just readily available, and some of them have to be looked for, researched, and actually implemented.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not a matter of not trusting your kid. So I could almost guarantee you someone close to you is going to come up to you and say, "Oh, so you just don't trust your kids? Is that why you have these things?" And you're going to have to firmly know. And I think a lot of parents just don't even understand that these tools are out there, but explain like why you have these tools in place and what they do and how they are protecting your kid.
Yeah.
And I think that's, as a parent, I can see other parents coming in and saying, trying to shift your mindset and saying like, "Oh, so you don't trust your kids?" I trust my kids completely, so I have nothing on their phones because I've raised them up right, and they know not to do that. That doesn't work.
Mm-mm.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was one of those kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
Did not work.
Right.
So don't be discouraged or upset if someone comes and says those things, and just firmly understand why you're doing
Yeah.
something and be
Yeah.
able to explain it
Yeah.
and stand on it.
Right. Yeah. And that's that's a foolish way to look at things.
Yep.
You don't trust your kids. Of course, what your kids need leadership. Your kids need to be nurtured and to be raised up.
Yeah.
And so, first of all, you're discerning, okay, how old are my kids? And if your kids have already gotten access to technology and they're young, like let's say younger than 10 years old, the younger your child is, the greater the safeguards that need to be in place, because
Mhm.
the more chances of them just unknowingly and really innocently
Mhm.
stumbling onto stuff is is there.
Yep.
Even putting your kid, like, let's say you've got him on a YouTube channel that's safe for kids. The algorithm works against you, because depending on the safeguards you have in place, the what you watch next along that right column of
Yep.
the video, the algorithm is going to put something in there that you don't want your kids to see.
Yep. Or ads.
It could be an advertisement, it
Yep.
could be another video, but it's going to be something that's going to be more than what you would want to expose your child to at that age.
Oh yeah.
So there's you have to have guardrails in place as long as you're parenting your kids, as long as they're at home. It does get adjusted as your kids get older.
Mhm.
It's like, I'm going to have much greater and much more bulletproof safeguards in place when my kids are real young. And then as I'm shepherding my kids, as I'm raising my kids, and they're getting more and more from, used to our culture and our standards, our values, and then we're releasing them more and more into independence as they become older,
Yeah.
then those safeguards are more and more, not released completely, but they're pulled back as you're releasing your kids into independence. Because, if if you if you want your kids to learn how to handle technology, you have to give them the opportunity at some point to handle it, but to handle it well.
Yeah.
And so if that's 16, 17, 18, whatever you decide, or younger, you have to though discern how much guardrail, how many guardrails you need in place to protect them.
Mhm.
And so there's guardrails, there's parental controls on the different applications. There are routers that you can use to actually begin to filter what goes through the internet that comes into your home. There's different safeguard systems out there that it would be better to research yourself, and we're not going to necessarily go into the specifics there, because I'm not necessarily a pro on those, and there'd be a lot better platforms that you could listen to for that. But the idea here is that you have to be involved with that process.
Yeah.
And so what are the filters you're putting on your home computer?
Yep.
Where's your home computer located? Do your kids have access to technology in their bedrooms? Those are all things that you can use, that you can actually plan around to safeguard your kids.
Yeah.
So we always had a family computer that was in the kind of in our great room. Boom, it was right there. The gaming system, like I said before, was in our great room. Boom, right there. So if the kids are playing a game, you knew it. And if they were playing a game when they shouldn't be, you knew it. And it was like, hey, you know what? Why don't you wait until you're able to play that and not play right now? And you have your charging station. So you're putting these pieces into place. Then you've got the technological safeguards with the parental controls. You can really, some of these things get very granular, and you can really, really dial in the parental controls, which is great. Because there's things that you would let maybe a 10-year-old watch that you wouldn't let a 7-year-old watch.
Mhm.
It's just as they're developing.
Yeah.
There's things that a teenager could watch, like if you've got a 14-year-old child and you've got a 6 or 7-year-old child, you've got to be able to different. You're not going to limit your 14-year-old to watching Dora the Explorer, because that's the only thing that your 6-year-old can watch.
Yeah.
So it takes some navigating here. It takes some time, but you'll never regret the time and effort you put into that,
Yeah.
because the damage that can be done is quick, it's deep, and it's pretty extensive when it happens. And the effects of not only predatorial activity on technology, but now cyberbullying is a big deal. The interaction that your children have with other people online
Mhm.
is so it opens them up to so much damaging type of activity that you can't be careful enough. And so when it comes to being a dad in the digital age, you have to be proactive here. You have to be involved. I would say don't let pressure and fear come in and cause you to want to act too soon and letting them get involved with that. But build your culture, build the foundations in their life, allow there to be years and years of you just pouring into your kids. And they're going to be just fine. They're going to get plenty of technology at school. They're going to get plenty of technology um, around with their friends and everything. And so resist that pressure to jump into that too soon, too quickly. Build your culture, build those foundations, and then at some point begin to integrate technology into their lives with very clear safeguards to where they've seen you model
Yeah.
this, and you've got your clear plan in place with your spouse with the safeguards on the technology side of things, and then you're releasing your kids into independence as they get older and older to the point where it's like, yeah, you're driving to work and you're going to practice and you're doing all these things on your own. Yeah, it's like I got my daughters, they got a phone and they got AAA. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I tried to teach them how to change a flat tire and how to jump a dead battery and that kind of stuff, but I didn't want them out stranded somewhere until I could, if I, couldn't get there right away. It was like, get them AAA
Yeah.
when they start driving and get them a phone so they can make the call, but then have the safeguards in place.
Yeah.
And so those are some things I think that could help dads in this digital age navigate some of those things, which are complex. And society, again, puts a ton of pressure on you.
Yeah.
And so don't give in to the pressure. You lead the way that you and your wife want to build the culture in your house.
Yeah. And if you don't know where to start, that's why we talk so much about community. And I talk a lot about mentorship. Find people, get in community with people around you, and look to see if they have kids that are older than your kids, or they have teenagers, and you like your family, you liked the way that they had things set up.
Yeah.
Have a dinner with them, take them out, ask them questions. What did you guys do? We love the way that you raised your kids around technology. How did you do it? And just start forming those relationships and having that mentorship. And like, if you don't know where to start, that's a perfect place to start. Is just find people around you that are doing it really well and ask questions.
Yes.
Because I know there's multiple families around us that we can go to with kids that are either older than ours or way older than ours, and just ask them, how do they do things?
Yeah.
And I mean, it can be complicated. You obviously don't want someone with kids that are 25 years old, because they're not in the same place that you are
Yeah.
currently with
That's like,
technology.
yep.
So be smart,
Yep.
obviously. But yeah, find people, couples, married couples that you look up to with kids, connect with them,
Yeah.
and pick their brains.
That's right. And set a high standard for yourself.
Yeah.
This is a weakness that we have, where we really dream about and desire to have a family culture with high standards.
Mm-hmm.
But then when we can't implement it ourselves, if we're not implementing it ourselves, we feel hypocritical in trying to implement it in our family. And so therefore we let it slide
Yeah.
and we give in. And so really starting with yourself, set high standards for yourself with your phone. Don't be on your phone when you're at dinner. Don't be at there's certain, and it's like, oh, that sounds super religious and super, you're trying to regulate everything. Yeah. You've got to be very disciplined in this arena, because it's easy for you and your wife to get some time together and then both of you are on your phones. And it's like, well, that's not what that that's not the best use of that time.
Yep.
And then we wonder, well, man, our kids they're on their phones all the time. So you set the standard for yourself, set a high standard, and live in that standard, so that then you can actually lead in such a way to where you have the inner confidence that you're living up to the standard, and that you can expect your family to do the same. And you'll see that when you raise the tide in your own life, that it's going to raise the tide in everyone's life in your home.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, start with yourself, lead with a high standard, believe big for your family. Understand that the technology is not going to set your kids up for success as much as you having a very clear family value system and a very healthy culture.
Mhm.
You build those foundations into your kid's life, and then it's like at some point in time, you and your wife decide we're going to integrate technology into our home, and then this is what we're going to do. And don't expect you to feel like it's the perfect plan, but expect to have a plan and begin to implement it, and then you can adjust it from there. But always go safety first, more guardrails than not,
Mhm.
and then allow that to be something to where you're adjusting that, and as you discern your kids getting older, and it may be different for each of your kids, whatever, but you lead through it and be present, and just let this be a part of the way that you shepherd that flock that God's given you.
Amen.
Yeah, and it's so important, and you'll never regret it. Like, there are certain things I look back and I'm like, man, I'm so glad that we did those things.
Mhm.
And of course, there's other areas where I'm like, man, I could have done better. But I'll never regret the work and the effort and the time and the attention that we put into that type of leadership in our home. And now that I have adult kids, it's like it's pretty amazing to see who they are, how they live their lives, and the fact that the foundations we started putting into their lives when they were little, you can see where we did a really good job. You can also see where, hey, you know what, we could have done better. But that's part of it.
Yeah,
There's
it's
no
so
perfect
good.
parent out there, but you just be the parent that gives you 100%. And this area is a big one for us to kind of put on the back burner and think, okay, well, someone else will take care of that. But no, lead as a dad in the digital age.
Yes. Amen.
Well, good. Well, I need to get on my phone and check social media now that we've been recording this podcast. I'm
Get
teasing.
out of here.
No, but you know what? We are grateful for technology. It's one of those things where you don't want to paint a bad picture on technology as a whole, because obviously if there wasn't for technology, these types of platforms wouldn't even be possible.
Yeah.
But leading with it well is important. And really it Mobilized Man, our desire is to provide building blocks for men's lives to help them in their life and leadership. And so we have this podcast that comes out every week, and it's a weekly podcast. It's been great doing this. This is our 13th episode.
Yep.
And so we're just kind of creeping into this being super consistent, but building it. And so it's been really good. I've been really grateful for the opportunity to speak into the lives of our listeners.
We're over 3 months in. 3 months
Yeah,
in.
that's right. Yep.
Goodness.
And so we also have a weekly newsletter that we put out. We send out through email to where it's called Waypoints. And it's a weekly guidance for life and leadership in your life. And it's a short email newsletter that we just try and, again, provide a building block in your life to encourage you, to help you lead. And then there's also upcoming events on there and opportunities to check out the podcast and that type of thing. And so if you're not getting the Waypoints newsletter, it drops every Friday at 5 a.m. And so you can actually sign up for that email newsletter on our homepage of the website, mobilizedman.com. There's a sign up right there on the front page. And I get a lot of great feedback on that email, which is interesting because it just kind of comes at a time, and it comes right to your inbox, something you can pull open during a break or a time when you get a couple of minutes. It's not long to read, but it just brings some real practical value to a guy's life. And so I'd encourage you to sign up for that.
And guys can reply to that email,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. We get guys who will reply to the content, or, give us feedback as far as like, man, that was really helpful, or, hey, John, this is something you should think about as well. Whatever it is, we love the feedback and appreciate any kind of connection that we get with the guys reading that. And again, it also does kind of highlight upcoming events or different things that you may not catch on the podcast. So would love to have you guys sign up for that on the website. We also have more shirts available. These Mobilized Man shirts are people have really liked these shirts. They're super comfortable and wear well, and they look pretty sharp. And so you can go onto the website, our website, the page called the shop, that's where we sell these shirts. And so get on to the website and buy a shirt. As far as the podcast goes, man, we love the fact that you're listening to us. We love the interaction that we get with you and the impact it's having on people's lives. It would be great if you would, follow our page on Spotify or Apple.
YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube as well. Leave like the content and leave a review if you would. I always used to get irritated with guys. She'd be like, yeah, like, however they would say it, in their video, leave a like and review. But you understand that, man, the way that these systems work, these platforms really promote material that gets recognized in that way. And so as we're trying to grow this platform, it'd be great. It'd be a huge help for us if you would follow us, leave a quick review, and even like the material, whether it's on whatever way that the platform has it set up. It's a big help for us.
Yeah. If you're listening to this, we film these episodes and they're on YouTube.
Yes.
So if you didn't know that, go to our YouTube. We have a YouTube channel, Mobilized Man.
Mm-hmm.
You can see our podcast there, and then we're kind of looking for content ideas for if you guys want product reviews. So maybe either respond to our email or leave a comment on one of our videos, what kind of videos you'd like to see, because we'd like to do more content other than just our podcast.
Yeah.
So let us know.
Yeah. Trying to incorporate some type of different content where we can just train guys in different areas. There's lots of things that we've got kind of on the burner that we're looking at doing. So, but yeah, certainly appreciate all you guys who are listening to this, and really look forward to continuing moving forward with the podcast. So as we wrap it up, until next week, stay on the path.